Well, hello everyone. This is our last simplex, and this one's probably, in my opinion, the most important. It is a little bit, it's just hard to remember all the little tricks to it, but that's why you're allowed notes on the exam. Okay, so first of all, remember your typical max will have a less than symbol on all of the constraints, but a typical min will have a greater than symbol on all of those constraints. And so if we look at this one, this problem right here, this is a typical max. You see P is equal, but then you see a less than, no problem. But look at this one. It has a greater than in a max problem. Okay, so this is going to have to be different. It just doesn't work like the other two sections we've learned. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a negative slack on that one. Okay, and then we're going to introduce something called an artificial variable. Okay, so it's another variable. It's an A variable. And I know I'm skipping over the words because I'm saying them. They're there for you to read if you want to. Here is what that constraint with the slack will look like all the way done. So when we have something the wrong direction, or it could be an equal sign. So I'll show how to write those ones out too. Then we have to introduce a negative slack, and we have to introduce an artificial variable. Okay, those go together. If you introduce a negative slack, you have an artificial variable. They go together, okay? Then on our objective function, that's going to be your function that has your profit or your cost, because it could be a min, it could be a max. Either one's acceptable on this. Then you can see that we add in this negative m artificial variable. Okay, so it's negative when it's still p equals, and it'll be positive when you move them all over to set up your negative indicators on the denominator. So what this is really doing is m is a massive number that you're subtracting off. So it's so big. That's what it's doing. So it's like kind of like a placeholder of a big number. And that's what it's explaining in front of you. So when I set this up with my slack, it's going to look like this all together, like all the way done with my slack variables. Don't be lazy and try to skip writing the slack out on the M method, because you're probably going to miss one of the A's or the M or something, and it'll throw off your entire problem. So there you go. That's what it's going to look like. So you'll notice it has the M here. This one's traditional. We just add a slack variable, picking up that slack, right, on that less than, but this one was greater than, so it has a negative slack because it's greater instead of less, and then it has the artificial variable. Okay, everything has to be greater than or equal to 0. All right. Let's go ahead and write it in our initial system. So our initial system is going to look like this. Definitely label, because it really doesn't matter if S and A's are in a little bit different order. So definitely label the top like you see on this one. So you have your X's, then your slack, then your artificial, then your P. Notice on the artificial, when I put it in here, it was MA1, right? Up here, it's MA1 in that P when you move it all over. So it'll have a 1 in whatever column, or whatever row column that it had that wrong constraint, and the M will then be here. Okay, you don't write the A1 with it, just like you don't write the X1 with it. Okay, so then from here, we have one other thing we have to take care of before we follow exactly what we've been doing. We have to get rid of the M, the big M, from the artificial area. So I'm going to do that by hand. So that's all written out for you, but I'm actually going to do it by hand because I want you to watch me do this. So give me just a sec. I think I have that written down. Okay, I'm going to write out this initial system again, just because we need it right in front of us. So 1, -1, -2, 1, 1, -1, 1, 0, 0, 0, -1, 0, 0, 1, M, and 0, 0, 1, and 10, 2, 0. Okay. And they went X1, X2, S1, S2, A1, P. All right, and then you have your traditional little lines, however. So look at this, M. Our first step, which is different from the other methods, is to get the M out of this row right here. So what I could think about is if I times the negative or the 1 by a negative M and add to M, that will make the 0 here. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So I'm going to take negative M times row 2, add it to row 3, and replace it on row 3. Showing your steps like this is important so that I know what you're doing. Okay. And so you know what you're doing, and you can look back at your work and know what you did too. It is helpful. So let's do that. It's going to look a little different. So we're replacing this on row 3. So this first one, we're going to times by negative M. Well, -1 times negative M is positive M, and then -2. Well, you can't combine those. So it truly is M minus 2, which is fine. Okay. The next one would be 1 times negative M, which is negative M minus 1. So I'm going to have negative M minus 1. Okay, then 0 times anything plus 0 is 0. -1 times M plus 0 is positive M. And then negative M times 1 is negative M, plus M is 0. And then 0 times anything plus 1, 2M on the last one's negative 2M plus 0 is negative 2M. Perfect. Not pretty, but done. Okay, let's write in our other numbers. 1, 0, -1, 1. Gosh, just got to try to make sure they're lined up, right? 10, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. Okay, and on these big M, because you have weird constraints, negatives, things, you're probably going to have to be a little more careful on your pivots. So look at this. M's a really big number. So what's going to be bigger negative? A negative really big number minus 1 more, or a big number minus 2? That's going to be positive, right? Big, huge number minus 2. So our negative indicator is going to be this one, because a negative M is going to be really big number. Okay, and then above, you remember you can't use anything that's negative or 0, and that happens a lot on these ones. So that's what I was meaning. It's a little bit different, but this one does have a 2 divided by 1 and a 10 divided by 1. So this one's pretty easy to see. It's that one. It's already a 1, so I don't have to divide. Thank goodness. Now I'm finally to a traditional pivoting. So I want to make everything a 0 rounded. So the top one, it would be a negative times row 2 plus row 1, replace on row 1 will get me that 0 on row 1. Now, what could I add to negative M to make a 0? I can add M. What can I add to -1 to make a 0? I can add 1. So opposite signs of what you see, I'm going to put it in a parenthesis. M plus 1 times row 2 plus row 3, replace on row 3. So I'm going to times that M opposite signs times 1, and those would add to 0, which I will show. Okay, so we're here. Now let's go ahead and do that. So we'll do our easy one first. So that's going to bring on all of those to be negative, and then add it to this top row. Okay, so, and then replace it on that top row. So a -1 becomes positive, that becomes a 2, that becomes a 0. The next one is 0 plus 1 is 1. And then 1, 2, 3. I have lost my spot from kicking over my key. -1, opposite signs 1, so that's 1. -1 is going to be -1, 0, 0, 8. All right. All I did is visualize changing the sign, adding. Bottom row. Okay. So maybe I should write this out as I do it. I'm going to change the color. I'm going to make it red and I'm going to write it just right under over here, I guess, because I don't have room. So I'm just thinking about middle row times m plus 1. So -1 is that first one, right? -1 times m plus 1 is just -m minus 1. Then the next term would be just m plus 1 because it's just a 1. The next one's a 0. The next one's another -1, so we'll just rewrite what we had on the other one. This one's a 1, and then a 0, and then a 2. So we'd have 2m plus 2, right? 2 times the m plus 1. So all I did is take this times this row, wrote them out with little weird lines. Doesn't matter. Maybe I'll keep it on red just so you can see that I'm replacing that bottom row with what they add together. So now I got to add this one with this one, right? So now think about, now I'm going to add to it, not timesing, the m minus 2. So the m's would cancel. -1 minus 2 more is a -3. So all that became a -3. This one has a -m minus 1. Both cancel. That becomes a 0. And this would then have, I lost. It's a 0. So 0 plus 0 is 0. And then this one's an m. So the m's cancel, and I have a -1. And then this row here was a 0. So I have to count the rows, sorry. M plus 1 plus 0 is m plus 1. And we don't really care where m moves. It's going to move into the artificial areas. We don't really care where m moves as long as it's no longer in your x's and your s's. Okay. And then 0 plus 1 is 1, and then this one, it's the -2m. Oops. So the m's would cancel, 2m and -2m, and you have a 2. Okay, and then I'll go back to regular color, and then that middle row stayed the same. And gosh darn, we still have a negative indicator, but now it doesn't have an m on it, which is nice. So the -3 is our next negative indicator. And we have to use this one because you can't use a negative. So we have to then divide by 2 on that row. I think I'm going to have to add a page real fast. Okay, so I'm going to take row 1 and divide it by 2. I squish it over there so I can fit it in. So that becomes 1, 0, 1/2, 1/2, -1/2, 0, 4. Divide everything by 2. And then everything else stayed the same. Okay. Now, we're still looking here. This is our pivot. So now we can just add rows 1 and 2. So row 1 plus row 2, replace on row 2 to get that first 0 where the -1 is, and then 3 times row 1 plus row 3. Is gonna replace on row 3. Okay, you're gonna get a laugh out of this. My watch keeps saying, "Keep up your activity." It thinks I'm exercising. Sitting here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take care of those 2 zeros. So we're adding the top 2 and replacing on the middle. So that becomes a 0. 1 and 0 make 1, 1/2 and 0 make 1/2. Negative 1 and 1/2 make negative 1/2. 1 and negative 1/2 make positive 1/2. 0 and 0, 4 and 2. I almost put 4, but I'm pretty sure they add to 6. Okay, then the top, oh, well, I'll do the bottom row. So 3 times the top row, right? So that's going to be a 0. 3 times 0 is 0 plus 0. 3 times 1/2 is 3 halves. I just times it to the top. Okay, 3 times 1/2 is 3 halves. Minus 1 is going to minus, so I have 1/2 left. Okay, I'm gonna have to show this next one because it's negative 1/2. And then you have m plus 1. So negative 1/2 times 3 is negative 3 halves, but you have to add it to m plus 1. So you have to just add the negative 3 halves and the 1. So that's going to be a negative 1/2. So this becomes m minus 1/2. Don't add it to the m. Add the numbers only. Okay. 0 times anything plus 1 is 1. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. And yes, I have no more negative indicators. We don't care. Let me break this out. Hold on just a second. Okay. We do not care that you have a negative minus 2 here. First of all, that's your artificial area, and the m is now moved to your artificial area. Let's label these. And honestly, m's a huge number. A huge number minus 1/2 is still a big number. So it's not going to be negative. Okay, that's S1, S2, A1, P. So what's our answer? X1 is 4, X2 is 6, SM1 is 0 because it's not anything, S2 is 0, and P is 14. Perfect. There's our first big M method one. Okay, the next question is really just writing out slack variables. Okay, so this is just slack. So I'm going to label these as row A, B, C, D, E, just because each one's a little bit different. So this is a maximum problem. So we need our constraints to be less than. So I'm going to highlight if they're not less than, this one's not less than, that one's an equal. Oh, and we can't have a negative over here. So I'm going to highlight the 3 can't haves. Okay. And a traditional, we can't have it less than a negative number, right? That's strange. So how are we going to fix these and write them in our slack? So let's start with A. And A is a traditional. So it's just going to have a slack variable, no artificial. So we're going to have x1 plus 2x2 minus x3 is less than, instead of less than, we're going to have our plus first slack variable. And then we'll have equals that 7, right? And that's it. Nothing different. That's our typical. The second one there has that -1. Well, we haven't seen that before. What the heck? We can't have that. So we can just times by -1. So you can't have, maybe we should write this out. You can't have negative number on right. I don't know how else to say that. On the right side, after your inequality sign. So you have to multiply by -1. Okay, let's do that. So that's going to make a positive x1, a negative x2, a positive 2x3. What does it do to your symbol? It changes it. Now it's not going the right direction, and that becomes a 5. So now we would have to introduce a negative slack and an A1 because now it's not going the right direction. Okay, so now we'll have to introduce our slack, which would make it like this. Plus 2x3 plus slack 2. I'm not going to be able to give that gap that we normally do just because I don't have space, but oh, I guess I could do that. Well, still don't have much space, but then I can write smaller. So slack, oops, what did I do wrong with my slack as I introduce my slack on one that's going the wrong direction? It has to be negative. Apologize. It has to bring it in as a negative slack, and you could give the gaps if you have the space. Okay. If I bring in the negative slack, I have to bring in my first artificial variable, and now it equals the 5. Okay. So I brought in a negative slack and an artificial variable. Okay, so that's our final answer for B. C. C, and we're not doing this problem at all. So just do not solve. Yeah, you would be here all week. It would be, I don't even know if it's doable. I'm sure it is, but I don't know that we care. Okay, so this one's going the wrong direction. It's a greater than in a maximum. So we're going to introduce the negative slack. So everything stays the same. We're going to introduce a negative slack, and we're on the third one. And now we're on the second artificial variable, and now that will equal 1. So not too much, but it's going the wrong direction. What do we do on A, B, C, D if it has an equal sign? Well, if it has an equal sign, then we just introduce an artificial variable. Why don't we need slack variable if you don't have a greater than or equal? Because slack picks up, like when we say it's less than, we might have a little between the highest you can be on that less than or max or greater than. We might have some slack. That's the whole point of that variable. So when we write this one out, it'd be 2x1 minus x squared plus 4x to the third. And then we just add in an artificial variable, and it's the third artificial variable, no slack equals 6. Okay, those are all the different things I could possibly see. Now, let's rewrite the objective function. Because right now it's p equals 2x1 plus 5x2 plus 3x3. Well, every time I add in an artificial, I have to add in a big M. So I'm going to minus a big M artificial 1, minus a big M artificial 2, and then minus a big M artificial 3. So I have 3 M's. Oof. E, I'm too lazy to write out E. E is now going to say X1, X2, X3, S1, S2, S3, A1, A2, A3 are all greater than 0. Yes, typing those in is a pain. I wish they'd leave that off some of the problems, but it is what it is. Okay. This is just kind of writing out. I'm going to go ahead and pause this here because I think you need to think about this. Maybe try that problem, the first problem that you have the answer to. And don't just open your homework and think you can figure it out. I mean, I really think you should try that one and get it right, then go to the homework. I am going to do another one in part 2.